It changed social policy. It changed medicine, altogether. And what the premise was that Jack would assist people in committing suicide, people who had terminal illnesses, who were suffering, and there was no ameliorative care for them. They couldn't. There was no relief for them. They were just suffering, and they're just waiting for the moment when they died.
Welcome to another episode of Cases Gone Wild with your host, me, John Marko, brought to you by Marko Law. I'm really excited to have you all here today because we have a very special guest. We have Steve Hnat, who has worked on some of the biggest cases in the country, has been involved in some of the biggest verdicts. So this is going to be a special show. Each show I bring to you some of the craziest cases and stories of Cases Gone Wild, and today's going to be no different. Don't forget, if you like our show, please follow us or like us. You can follow us on Spotify, but also we have a YouTube channel where you can watch the show. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about two big cases that I think everybody knows about that you were on, involving significant media attention. Netflix was on all kinds of famous stuff. There's, first of all, the Jenny Jones case.
Yeah.
So for those, I don't know if our listeners know about this case. It was a very famous case. There was a Jenny Jones talk show. This case has been featured on national media. It was on Netflix on a special called Trial by Media. And I understand that you worked on the Jenny Jones case.
Yeah, we did. That was a hard case.
A very hard case.
Yeah.
And what was that, Mark Amador? Am I saying that correctly? Or Scott
Amador. Yeah, was killed by the Jonathan Schmitz, who was invited onto the show. Jenny Jones solicited Secret Crush. It was about secret crushes.
Yeah,
right?
and Jenny Jones is like modern day Maury or Jerry Springer type stuff, but it's real.
Right. Yeah, and so so what they did was they told Schmitz, who had a psychiatric condition and was maintained on medication, but he was had a condition, that you have a secret crush. Would you be willing to come to Chicago on a show? Right. And he was
and he's from Michigan.
He was homophobic, and
so he thinks, he goes on the show thinking there's like a girl
that's his secret crush.
And he's probably all excited.
His dream come true, right?
Yeah.
And it turned out to be Scott Amador, who was was gay, and so
it's revealed on national television,
right. And he and he's like, oh yeah, he's laughing a little bit, but he comes back, goes on a bender, drinking.
So he's outed on. So he goes on national TV.
Yep.
And they air this episode on national?
They aired the
TV?
episode. Yeah.
So
well, you know what? I take that back. I'm not sure they aired it, but the footage was available.
Yeah. And he goes on this show in Chicago. He's to travel to Chicago.
Yeah.
And thinks he's gonna have a girl, and it's really some dude who has a gay crush on him.
Yeah.
And does he flip out at the time or no?
He responded by laughing. He laughed it off on stage, right? And that turned out to be a key part of the trial process, because their defense was, he wasn't that upset. Look at, he's laughing, he's not upset at all. But the reality was, he was laughing to cover up his, he was mortified. He came back, began drinking, and then took a shotgun and killed Mr. Amador.
Killed the lover.
Right.
The lover.
So, he wasn't a lover, but,
the crush. The crush,
right,
whatever,
right.
Yeah.
And so, during the course of the trial, now it's national, and Jenny Jones is a big media, and she's going to come and testify and blah, blah, blah.
So Jeff sues this Jenny Jones show.
Yeah.
For creating this situation that led to the death of the crush guy, the guy who had the crush.
Jenny Jones is like, she's been, she's a polished person, and everyone's starstruck, and we're worried about the jury being, star and whatever. But
Jenny Jones was a very big talk show.
Oh yeah, it was big time, and she got on this, and we had her late in the afternoon, and then it was interrupted for the following morning.
And this is in Oakland County Circuit Court,
Circuit Court, yep. Televised on, what's the name of that?
Court TV.
Court TV, yeah. And so we're
So
talking.
the media was there the whole time,
Oh,
right?
yeah, a lot of media. And Jeff and I were and Ven Johnson, were trial team, were talking afterwards, and I said, Jeff, you notice something, about Jenny Jones. When she's nervous, she smiles and she laughs, right? Use that to your advantage, because that's their defense. Schmidt wasn't upset because he laughed, right? And
So their defense was he never really was that upset?
he wasn't that upset. It wasn't a big deal. This has nothing to do with the show.
Okay, got it.
So the next morning, Jeff was just perfect on tempo. He's asking her questions. She starts, oh, no, I don't think so. And stuff
Jenny
like that.
Jones.
Yeah.
He's got Jenny Jones on
And
the
so he
stand.
goes, I noticed that, like, you laugh a lot, with some of these questions. You think it's funny? And she goes, oh, no, I'm just laughing because I'm nervous. And he goes, exactly. That's what Jonathan Schmitz did, didn't he? He was laughing because he was humiliated and he was trying to cover it up. And she was, like that, and Feeney's like, the defense attorney's like jumping up, Judge, right?
Yeah.
So the jury kind of got, but there was another thing that was really instructive about that case. And something we talk about a lot is that you can never underestimate the power of a witness. You may think a witness is a minor witness, and inconsequential to your case and your themes in your case, but they could turn out to be, a powerful tool. So you can't underestimate any witness. You really think about the witness and what you want from them, what they mean to the case.
Yeah.
Because at one point, Schmidt's girlfriend was going to testify, and Jeff had Ven Johnson do the.
Schmitz is the person who shot
right,
Amador. Right.
So.
So you're
Jeff-
gonna have
Jeff wanted-
who's gonna call the girlfriend?
We were calling him.
Okay.
The plaintiff was calling him.
And why?
And Jeff wanted Ven to do the exam because she would testify about how upset he was.
Okay.
And she was upset.
Did he
believe me.
testify, the shooter too?
Yeah. No, he didn't. He was in jail.
Okay.
He had been convicted of murder. So anyways, we're in the basement and, and Ven comes up and he goes, man, I don't know what to do. I'm really upset. I'm nervous about this because she is like hostile. She's really hostile. And I says, what do you mean she's hostile? And she goes, she won't talk to me at all. And I says, well, let's try and talk with her, and let's, let me come with you and see, what we can do. And she was in the cafeteria, and so the two of us, go over and I say, hi, I'm Steve Hnat. I'm part of the trial team, and I wonder if I can, talk with you a little bit about, your testimony in a little bit. And she looks at me and she looks at Ven and she looks at me and she goes, I don't know if I could say this. I could say it on a podcast.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
This
she-
is like there's like a warning on this podcast
Quote.
that says like, don't your kids,
So this is a quote.
hide your kids.
Yeah, this is a quote. She looks at me and she goes, fuck you and fuck you. I don't want to talk to either one of you. And she looks away. Now, Ven is not real pleased at all at this point because he was really nervous right to begin with. And now she's saying, she was really hostile. And so we sat down and I said, all right, listen, man, let's talk a little bit about why would she be so angry? Why would she be so hostile, especially to you, And we talked a little bit about how people have hurt and they have upset and how they cover up their emotions with, anger is a secondary emotion. And how do you recognize when she's upset, and how do you use that in order to get her to communicate, not that she's upset, but why she's upset, okay? And how do you get to that, And we talked a bit about it, and Ven was just, again, on tempo. He was on tempo. She was testifying. Of course, his one-word responses, curt, rude, no, yeah, whatever, it's that sort of thing. And then he asked her about something, and she kind of looked down, paused and looked down for a moment, and then looked back up, and Ven changed his tone of voice, and said, what were you just feeling? What happened just now? And she, up to this point, was like one-word responses, hostile, just burst out wailing. I mean, just, oh my God. And she was crying. Tears were coming out. How could they do this to people? How could they do this to a human being? I don't understand it. What kind of people are these? For money? For money, they destroy the lives of all these people? And, so we had to, judge had to, intervene, and, we had to call a little timeout so she could get her composure back together. But I talked with the jurors afterwards, and they said, we had been in trial about 2 weeks at that point. And they said, when she testified, we understood finally what this case was all about. We really understood how many people's lives were destroyed by what they did on that show. And it made a huge difference.
Wow.
Just a minor witness in a
minor
huge
witness
case.
with a huge impact.
Right. So
now
never underestimate the value of a witness.
Was Jenny Jones there the whole time?
Not the whole time, no.
Yeah.
No, she was only there for a few days. They had some Warner Brothers, I think, owned the show at the time, and they had an attorney who was there the whole time. She wasn't a very nice person. She was kind of mean.
Yeah. Well, part of the course, I guess. They didn't really care.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal for them. They did not want to get a verdict against them, which they did. But that was a very instructive trial. Now a lot different than Kevorkian, I'll tell you that.
So tell us a little bit about Kevorkian with some of the time that we have left here. I'd like to hear. So, I mean, I remember this growing up, but some of our younger listeners, or maybe people who have forgotten or aren't from Michigan, I mean, this was a big deal. This was on 60 Minutes. This was on national news. And so tell us, who is Jack Kevorkian? If you want to know more about this, I mean, there's a Netflix show, there's an HBO special called You Don't Know Jack. This was, I think, Jeff was a great attorney, but this really put Jeff
on the map,
nationally, right?
Yeah, it really did, because it changed social policy, it changed medicine, altogether. And what the premise was that Jack would assist people in committing suicide, people who had terminal illnesses, who were suffering, and there was no ameliorative care for them. They couldn't. There was no relief for them. They were just suffering, and they're just waiting for the moment when they died. And so his idea was, if you really have compassion for if an animal is suffering, you put it out of its misery, right?
Yeah,
it's the same principle for human beings. Compassion, dictates that under certain circumstances, that person should make that decision
to be able to take their own life.
Although I have to tell you, that really wasn't his position to begin with. Jeff and I made that a social policy position because, as we talk again, you figure out the meaning, of a case. It's like, Da Vinci once said, a real artist finds the sculpture in the rock. You have a rock and you have to look for what the sculpture is in it,
right, rather
than try and shape
it.
Well,
what was Dr. Kevorkian's position, if that wasn't it?
Well, he did have compassion for you. He thought they should be able to end their own life. He was death phobic. He spent his entire life organized around his fear of dying, and he became a pathologist partly because of it. He immigrated here from his family was Armenian, and they survived the Armenian Holocaust, but not a lot of his family died during it.
Yeah.
So he was really afraid of dying.
Wasn't he in the army too, or something?
He was a surgeon, and he would. Stuff? Yeah, I mean, he thought outside the box. He thought about using cadavers, blood from recently deceased cadavers, to take the plasma and use it to save other people's lives, which kind of makes sense, But he in exchange for helping people to pass, he would look in their eyes and measure their pupil dilation at the moment of death. He had this theory that you could figure out the exact moment of death by measuring pupil dilation.
Can you?
I don't know. I'm not so sure.
But
we decided, this is a civil rights issue. This is really an issue of you should be the one that makes that decision. If you're competent, right? If you're not psychiatrically disturbed, you should make the decision for yourself and not have government or anybody else. It should be a matter of your own conscience, in consultation with your family and medical people.
Which was a controversial, it still is today, but even more, when was this? When? Oh
gosh, this was in the 90s.
Which was much more controversial back then for religious and moral reasons, right? Because
the Archbishop of Detroit said that we were participating in murdering people, and we had people showing up at the office with guns, asking for Kevorkian or for Feiger.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
that's insane.
That happened a lot. It was those were wild times, And Jack, we had to try the case in spite of Jack. Jack, think about this. You got a client who's on trial for murder who admits to doing it and says it every time he has the opportunity, in front of the press, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's like...
But he at first, he wasn't injecting them himself, right? He'd set up a machine, and then they had to push a button or something, right?
Yeah,
he'd put, the medicine, whatever,
Potassium, essentially.
The stuff that would basically give them a lethal injection.
Right.
Had put the needle in, right? Or would they do the needle?
They would do the needle themselves.
Okay, they would do the needle, and then had set it up, and then they'd push the button, right?
Right.
And so, how did Jeff do this case? How did he even get this case? I mean, how did?
Well, I'll tell you how he called me up one day. It's a Saturday. Saturday, he goes, listen, I got a guy in my office right now. I think he's nuts, but I wonder if you could come in and talk to him, and let me know what you think. I said, okay, sure. So I drove to his office and met Jack and his sister, and I talked with him, and I said, no, he's not crazy. I mean, he doesn't have a psychiatric condition.
Was he being charged with murder at that time?
He was being charged with murder, and he was going to do the case himself. And then his sister convinced him, no, you need to get a lawyer, right? So he got one lawyer. The lawyer says, no, well, if you're going to do it, you're going to have to plead, right? And he goes, I'm not going to plead. This is an issue. We need to make this an issue. I did it, and I did it on purpose. Which is first degree murder. So then, then Jeff's saying, well, what do we do? I mean, he's like, he tells people he did it. He says, well, we have to make the issue what he did rather than the law. So let's talk about.
That's what's called jury nullification, right?
Well,
technically he's guilty.
Technically, yeah. Technically, it's like, yeah. Although his motive wasn't malicious, so it was the intent that we were attacking from a legal perspective. But what we wanted to do was to focus on not on the act itself, but rather, the issue of compassion, and the person's ability to make their own decisions. But keep in mind, none of these people, none of their families ever filed a criminal complaint. Nobody ever said, Kevorkian killed our brother or our sister.
It was the Oakland County prosecutor. Who was that at that time?
Thompson.
Okay.
Who was like a super religious dude.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was opposite ends of the spectrum.
Kind of. Although I'd argue that that Jeff had a spiritual component to him that I think few people realize. That there was an element of he had an ability to cut through facts and go to the heart of the matter in terms of the case itself. His evolution was really an evolution from the anger that he had. He just had, for various reasons throughout the course of his life, his personality was organized around his anger. And so it was a matter of helping him
Jeff,
to be able
you're
to...
talking about.
Jeffrey, yeah. So it's a matter of helping him to be able to use his anger in a constructive fashion, rather than, attacking everyone, use it to motivate people, right?
Right.
In that sort of thing. And
so what happened with this? How did he take this case, which, I mean, from just a facts perspective, is a loser? I mean, I don't, at least
from a fact perspective, but like when in the Jenny Jones case, we did 6 mock jury trials and we lost every single one of them.
What?
Every single one we lost, but we learned how to win the case. With the Kevorkian, we did mock juries, and what we found was that the overwhelming sentiment of all the jurors in the research that we did was that, this is the right thing to do. This is the right thing to do. He did it, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? So it really was a nullification in that sense. But, what we did was we had to approach it as intent and motive.
Yeah.
As being,
because these people were really sick, right? I mean,
they were all terminally ill.
Yeah.
All terminally ill, all had a progressive illnesses where they would basically slowly suffocate to death over years.
Yeah.
Right? Or have intractable pain that pain medication, couldn't alleviate. And they were all terminal, certified terminal.
Yeah.
We developed guidelines. I was like the only non-physician on Physicians for Mercy committee that drew up the guidelines. One of the guidelines was that they had to have a psychiatric exam to certify they weren't suicidal. And
that they weren't crazy,
that,
right? And
that
say,
they weren't, that they were competent and they weren't suicidal.
to make their own decisions.
Right.
So what happened?
Which makes you
with
think,
this-
you know, these are people who are considering ending their life, but they're not suicidal.
Yeah.
And there's a subtle
Different.
distinction to be made there. Yeah.
So what happened at trial?
Well, the first trials,
There was 3, right?
there were 3 sets of trials. Yeah. And most of them involved multiple people.
Okay.
The first one, Jack occupied himself by teaching himself Japanese, which was a tremendous relief for both of us.
Because you were worried about the client.
We were worried about Jack because he had a temper, and like I said, he was like in your face. Him and Jeff are like peas in a pod. I'll tell you that. They can't wait. They couldn't wait to get in your face and tell you how you were wrong or what you were wrong about.
Yeah.
And we were worried about him acting out during trial, but he just taught himself Japanese and, did his thing and, not guilty. This is a great one.
How long was the trial?
Several weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was first degree murder trial. It was intense. The second one we had was it the second or third one? I forget. They kind of blend together now at this point. But one of them was a mistrial because we found out that one of the prosecutors had somehow intervened in the homicide of his sister-in-law, something along those lines. And so Jeff mentioned it or something like that, and it was like it was in Albion. It was like it's like the whole
Albion.
place, the whole place fell apart. Yeah.
This was in Albion County?
I think it was in Albion County, yeah. Yeah.
That's a whole different ballgame than Oakland County.
Yeah, it
right?
wasn't, they thought they had their best shot out there because of a conservative community. But
yeah.
I'll tell you what, they were wrong about that too, because we did mock jury trials there. And
So
they were no different
So he's
than in
being
Urban.
charged with murder.
Yeah.
Dr. Kevorkian. They beat the rap and then he does it again.
Yep.
And then Jeff beat the rap again.
Yep.
And
Does
then
it
he did
again.
it again.
The third one, I think Jack decided he'd dress up as Thomas Jefferson and appear in court in costume, which he did.
How did that go over?
Yeah, not too well with me, but I think at that point people knew enough about him
Yeah.
that they just kind of said, "Oh, okay, well that's
Jack.
That's Jack." And Jeff was really the star, in those trials because he was arguing, a civil rights trial. I mean, it was as close as I could, as I would imagine, like Clarence Darrow, arguing the Sweet trial in Detroit, years ago.
Yeah.
That it was like, it was about something bigger. And every jury wants to be involved in something that's bigger and something that's significant. There's no the job of the attorney, and you're really good at this, is nothing's trivial. Everything is important, in that every trial, no matter how ordinary it may seem on the surface, is not ordinary to that human being who's suffering, right? And you have to communicate how that human being's suffering to the jury, and then they understand it, and then they begin to expand from that.
So what would you say? I know we want people to buy your book, right? The Authentic Attorney. It's a great book. I really do encourage people. It's an easy read too.
Yeah, I wrote it for high school level. I mean, it's to tell stories, to make the point and to tell the story from a trial to illustrate.
Well, I like it. You teach through example. You don't just say like, here, do this, do that. You talk about real examples and trials that you've been involved with. Yeah. But what would some advice be that you give to lawyers trying, their first case, or what to do or not to do? If you had to give some of your best advice, other than buying your book for the whole
buy the book,
shebang.
right, and read. Well, there's so many aspects of it, but I think probably the most important preparation for any trial attorney beginning their career, and approaching every trial, is to know yourself well enough. You have to have a degree of introspection to know yourself well enough to understand what the meaning of that case is for you. What does this mean to me? What is it about this case that resonates with me, that provokes me, into representing this person and their cause? And by doing that, that process of introspection, whether you're initially looking at the case and trying to understand the meaning of the case, and people are used to looking at the value of the case. Well, that's ridiculous, because some of the most meaningful cases and the most successful cases in terms of money awards were cases that Jeff took on or other people took on that other attorneys had absolutely refused to have anything to do with. Swans being one example. Homeless guy, schizophrenic, out on freezing to death in winter in Lansing, with no relatives, and a veteran, right? And the police kill him, right? No one would take that case. Jeff took it. We ended up winning $9 million in that case.
Yeah.
Cases aren't, if you look at a case in terms of what the potential money value of it is, you'll completely miss it. If you look at a case in terms of understanding what the meaning of that case is for you and for that individual, and to understand that thoroughly, then you're in a better position to understand the case and what it in the real value of the case, in terms of justice, in terms of compassion, and ultimately in terms of a verdict.
Yeah.
Right. But you're also in a position to understand the voir dire aspect of, so, you understand yourself and the aspects of the case. Then you can you can identify the most important biases that most attorneys have that they have to sort out in voir dire are their own biases. Right.
Right.
Oh, you remember the case, the inner ghetto, right? The inner ghetto case.
The inner ghetto
right?
case.
There was a case where your concern was this guy was just such a street urchin, that he was just so.
He had tattoos up and down his neck.
Tattoos. He spoke in a way that you could barely understand him. And
he had been like a drug dealer.
Right.
He
was a street guy. And we're worried about that. And then ultimately came to the idea, look, there were three different physicians. He had a wound, issue, and gauze was left in his wound.
Yeah, we
and
talked
one
about
physician,
this on the last
then it
episode.
transferred to another physician, then another physician.
And everybody
right?
treated him like they saw him.
Whatever. It's like, oh, yeah, you got gauze in there. It's going to get infected. Yeah, see you later, right, type of thing. So why would it be, so we were in a position where he had to argue that three different physicians independently committed malpractice, or it wasn't malpractice.
Yeah.
And then we decided, okay, the reason why three different physicians independently didn't treat him appropriately was because of who he was.
Right.
It wasn't because of what was wrong with him. It's because of who he was. And so, we kid around and saying, you had to embrace your inner ghetto to understand that aspect of it. And we had a jury that was perfect for that argument and understood it right from the get-go.
Yeah, and and I think the pinnacle was in closing when the defense attorney on that case got up and said to the jury, given that we had almost turned that case into a civil rights case.
Yeah.
About disparity of medical treatment for African Americans, poor people in the inner city. This guy got the worst medical care anybody could ever get, below the bare minimum. And it was because of who he was and where he came from. And I don't know if you remember, but the defense attorney got up in closing. You might have left, because just so people know, if Steve starts leaving in the middle of your trial, that means he thinks you're going to lose and wants to be away from you when you lose. Because when I look back and Steve's gone, oh, Steve had a doctor appointment today. That means shit's going bad.
Well, I came back the next day. But I don't think it was the closing that made the difference. I think the difference was the question you asked one of the doctors. Would you treat your brother-in-law the same way?
Yeah, and it was like a rich white doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, no. Right?
Yeah.
And that was it. That was the case.
Yeah. But they treat our client that way.
Yeah.
But in the you're right. But in closing, though, I don't know if you remember, not a practice point, but it was interesting. The defense attorney gets up, and he's a very experienced, very good attorney, has tried more cases than me. He apparently had tried 100 cases in a row and never lost. And this defense attorney gets up and talks about to this jury, I was raised at an orphanage on the corner of Detroit.
Yeah.
And I was raised, he was trying to embrace his inner ghetto. I think it was a little too late, though.
Yeah, way too late for that, right?
And, the nuns taught me, the nuns of the Sacred Heart or whatever, taught me to be respectful of everybody. And I don't think Mr. Marko learned those lessons from those nuns.
Yeah.
And do you remember what I did?
Oh, yeah. You talked about your experience.
Yeah.
In parochial, and getting kicked out of parochial school and having to go to a public school that, was a diverse school.
Yeah,
right?
where there was like 10% white kids.
Yeah.
And I said, so while I may not have learned my lessons from the nuns, I sure learned my lessons from going to inner city public school and being a minority.
Right.
And if it wasn't for that experience, I wouldn't be able to be here representing this client who I'm proud to represent.
Yeah.
You know, who
Yeah.
was African American, had tattoos, came from very poor, was treated differently
Right.
because of that. So I sure understand what I need to understand.
Right.
Something like that. And the jury got it. They were shaking their heads and
Well, they understood what it was about, and then you're saying, you have to understand. Well, you were communicating the meaning to you
of
about
what
the
happened.
case,
Yeah.
about what happened, and they had already they got it, and so they were totally in your
And the
camp.
defense was completely startled by the case because in a way it was a medical malpractice. They thought of it as a technical medical malpractice case, but in the end it was almost a civil rights case.
Yeah, we turned it into a
Civil rights case, right? It's about, even if in voir dire and jury selection, we asked, should someone get substandard medical care because of their race or because of where they come from or because they're poor? I mean, and so we already had identified that issue, and they were just not equipped to pivot and deal with the reality. And we weren't making anything up. That was the reality. This guy was given no medical care because he was a black dude, poor black dude, former drug dealer from inner city Detroit with tattoos up and down his neck. And in a way, the defense was treating this guy like the doctors had treated him.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, they saw the case from a traditional defense attorney's perspective. We've got 3 really qualified, well-respected physicians who all made the same decision independently.
Yeah.
And
what do they have?
And
we've
got all these guys that are come in and they're going to say these are great guys, and they, and da-da-da-da and that sort of thing. But that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case.
So you have to look for that because what you said is true. That case, was handed off to me because no one else wanted to try it.
Right.
And it was thought it was going to be a loser, right?
Yeah. How much did you get on that?
3.1 million plus sanctions. So we were, we did pretty well.
On a case no one wanted to take.
Nobody wanted to take.
Right.
And a lot of the cases, Griffey, that case we talked about earlier, he had been at 2 other attorneys. They turned his case down. Now it's the largest employment verdict in the history of Michigan.
Right.
Other than Gilbert, which you were on, the Gilbert case. But, there's always more than meets the eye, right?
Well, that's right. Because, and again, it's because you have to understand the meaning of the case. Not just the facts of a case, but the meaning of the case as you take it. Because if you're just looking at it in terms of what's the cost effectiveness of taking this case and bringing it to trial, you'll miss big cases. That's how you overlook the diamonds in the rough.
But that's what the insurance company do. They don't look at the meaning of the case, right?
Right.
It's simply a matter of
what are the odds?
What are the odds?
Right.
What are the numbers?
Right.
And how do they end up working out in the end? So,
and I think the only other really important aspect of it is understanding the meaning is being authentic in front of the jury. Being yourself, being true to yourself. And really knowing what that means. Not imitating other lawyers. Not taking on their tactics or whatever. One of the points I make in the book early on is listen, don't adopt these techniques. Adapt them. Take them on. Use what you can that feels natural and normal for you to use, and use them. And the ones that you don't feel comfortable with, don't.
Yeah, I mean, there's no secret recipe to this, right?
No.
I mean, you can't read.
There's no easy recipe.
There's no easy recipe either. It's hard work, and that's the name of your book, Authentic Attorney. But being authentic is sometimes easier said than done, right?
Yeah,
and it's always a journey of trying.
It's an existential issue for every human being, right?
Yeah.
I'm authentic. I'm not sure that I understand myself yet at this stage in life. I'm going back to school for because I like many body quantum physics. But that's something I like. But I'm not going to teach physics or do physics for the rest of my life. And I'm not really a psychologist anymore. I'm not just I mean, I see my job at this point as helping young lawyers to to be better, human beings, better lawyers. That's really kind of like
Yeah,
the overriding
yeah,
mission.
yeah.
I mean, I love, like, your associate, I hope to get like her first $1 million verdict. That's like the most wonderful feeling in the world is, having a young attorney win their first big case and understand what just happened, right?
And figure out how and why. So, Steve, this has been awesome. You're still doing jury consulting. I encourage people to read your book, not just because I love you, man, and I want you to do well. And I mean,
Thanks.
shit, your book's too cheap, dude. The first thing I told you is, what is this? You can get this on Amazon, right?
Yeah.
What is it, like $15 or something? You should be up in this.
Well, I want it's not. I'm
You
not
didn't
gonna,
write it
I'm
for
not
the
going to
money.
make a lot of money for that.
All right, now
right?
listen. Is there going to be a second book?
That's right, and you'll probably be a little bit earlier.
All right.
Okay.
I'll be on page 99
Yeah,
instead
yeah,
of
yeah,
120
yeah.
or whatever. All right. Well, I hope I earned it. And hey, it's been great having you on the show,
Yep.
man. Thanks a lot. It's been awesome. It's been a great time today. We've learned about some of the craziest, most insane cases. If you Google some of these cases we talked about today, you're going to see. I mean, you can watch TV shows about them. We're not just making these up here. So thank you to Steve Hnat. Thank you for watching or listening, whatever you're doing on whatever platform. Again, remember, please follow our show. You can watch it on our YouTube channel as well. It's on our website if you need help with any of your legal matters. We're here to help. That's markolaw.com. Go to www.markolaw.com. You can learn more about us. You can watch our podcast there or give us a call, 313-777-7-LAW. Until next time, on behalf of Marko Law and Cases Gone Wild, we'll see you on the next one.